There's a moment that no one prepares you for. It's not the moment they leave. It's not the moment they stop replying. It's not even the moment they make you feel like you meant nothing. It's the moment they finally understand what they did to you. But here's the part that makes this so painful. That moment doesn't come when you're still there. It comes later, much later, when you've already gone through everything alone, when you've already cried the tears they never saw, when you've already questioned your worth in silence, when you've already tried to make sense of something that never made sense. That's when it hits them. And by then, you're no longer the same person they left behind. And in this video, I want to walk you through something most people never fully understand. What actually happens inside an avoidant after they walk away from someone who truly loved them, because they do realize, not immediately, not when it matters, but eventually something shifts, and when it does, it changes everything. Most people misunderstand avoidance. They think avoidants don't care. They think they're cold, detached, unaffected. But that's not true. Avoidants feel deeply. They just don't allow themselves to feel. At the right time, they delay it, they suppress it, they avoid it. And that delay is where everything begins to break. Because while you were feeling everything in real time, they were disconnecting from it. While you were trying to understand what was happening, they were trying not to feel anything at all. And that difference creates a kind of pain that's hard to explain, because from your perspective, things were building. From theirs, things were becoming too real. That's where it starts, not with a big fight, not with something obvious, but with a shift, subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. They start pulling back, taking longer to reply, becoming less present, less emotionally available. And you feel it, even if you can't explain it yet. Something is different. But when you try to talk about it, you don't get clarity, you get distance. I just need space. I've been overwhelmed. I don't know what I feel right now. And those words don't match the connection you thought you had, because just days ago, maybe weeks ago, everything felt real, consistent, natural, effortless. Now, suddenly, you're trying to understand what changed. And this is where it begins to affect you. You start replaying conversations, looking for the moment things shifted, trying to find something you did wrong. You become more aware, more careful, more emotionally invested, not because you're too much, but because you're trying to stabilize something that's becoming unstable. And the more you try, the more they pull away. That dynamic is what slowly breaks you, because you're trying to get closer to someone who is trying to create distance. And no matter how much effort you put in, it never feels like enough. Not because you weren't enough, but because they couldn't meet you where you were. And that's the part most people don't understand. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person, but you don't see that yet. At this stage, you still believe. If you just say the right thing, do the right thing, give the right amount of space, everything will go back to how it was. But it doesn't, because what's happening inside them has nothing to do with how well you love them. It has to do with how comfortable they are receiving it. And when love starts to feel real, consistent, secure, that's when an avoidant begins to feel something else. Pressure. Not pressure you're intentionally creating, but pressure that comes from emotional exposure. Because now they're being seen. Now they're being known. Now they have something to lose. And instead of leaning into that, they start to retreat from it. Not because you did something wrong, but because something inside them feels unsafe. So they create distance, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. And eventually they leave. And this is the part that hurts the most, because while you're sitting there trying to process everything, trying to understand what just happened, they feel relief, not sadness, not regret. Relief. The pressure is gone. The emotional expectations are gone. The need to show up consistently is gone. And in that moment, they convince themselves they made the right decision. This feels better. I needed this. This just wasn't right. But what they're actually feeling is not peace. It's escape. They didn't solve anything. They just removed themselves from it. And what you avoid doesn't disappear, it waits. At first, everything feels quiet. No more conversations, no more emotional intensity, no more expectations, just space. And for a while, that space feels comfortable, but silence has a way of revealing things. Because once the distractions are gone, there's nothing left to hide behind, no one to push away, no one to blame, no situation to escape from. Just them and their own thoughts. And that's where something begins to shift, slowly, subtly. At first, they remember the reasons they left, the pressure, the confusion, the moments they felt overwhelmed. And this reinforces their decision. It helps them stay disconnected from what really happened. But time changes memory. And over time, those moments lose their intensity. And something else starts to take their place. The good moments, the way you showed up, the way you cared, the way you stayed, even when things became difficult. And this is where the first crack appears, because now they're not just remembering why they left. They're starting to remember what they lost. And that realization doesn't come all at once. It happens in moments, small ones, unexpected ones. A memory surfaces. A place feels different. A quiet night feels heavier than usual. And suddenly, they feel something they'd allow themselves to feel before. Loss, not just losing you, but losing how you made them feel, the safety, the warmth, the consistency, something real. And now, for the first time, they're not distracted from it. They're sitting in it, and they don't fully understand it yet. But something inside them knows this isn't over, because what comes next is where everything deepens, where regret begins to form, where they stop just missing you and start understanding what they did to you. And that realization changes everything. At first, they don't call it regret. They don't even recognize it as something serious. It just feels like something is off, a kind of restlessness they can't explain, because on the surface, their life is normal. They're going out, talking to people, keeping themselves busy, but internally, something keeps pulling them back to you. Not in a dramatic way, not all at once, just in moments, small ones, a random thought during the day, a memory that appears without warning, a feeling they can't quite shake. And at first, they push it away because that's what they've always done. They distract, they avoid, they move on. But this time, it doesn't go away. It lingers. And the more it lingers, the harder it becomes to ignore. Because now, they're not just remembering you, they're starting to feel you. The absence of you. An absence has a different weight. Because when you were there, they could take your presence for granted. Now, there's nothing to hold on to, and that's when the shift begins. They start replaying things, not intentionally at first, it just happens. A conversation, a moment, a look you gave them, the way you stayed, even when things got difficult, and something about that starts to feel different now, because before, it felt like pressure. Now, it feels like effort, real effort. And that realization creates discomfort because now they're seeing things from a perspective they didn't have before. They start noticing how patient you were, how many chances you gave, how many times you tried to understand them instead of walking away. And now those same moments hit differently because they know something they didn't know back then. They know you're not there anymore. And this is where regret begins. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly and persistently, they start asking themselves questions. Why did I do that? Why did I pull away when things were good? Why couldn't I just stay? And for the first time, they don't have easy answers because the explanations they used before, they were too much. It was too intense. I needed space. They don't feel as convincing anymore. Now, they feel incomplete because something deeper is starting to surface. It wasn't about you. It was about them. And that realization is uncomfortable because it removes the distance they created. It removes the justification and it places the responsibility back on them. And responsibility is something avoidants struggle with when it comes to emotions because it forces them to confront something they've been avoiding, themselves. And this is where guilt starts to form, not all at once, but in layers they begin to see not just that they left, but how they left. How they became distant, cold, uncertain, how they made you feel confused when all you were doing was trying to love them, how they made you question yourself when the issue was never you. And that realization doesn't feel good. It feels heavy because now they're not just missing you. They're understanding the impact they had on you. They start imagining what it must have felt like for you, waiting for replies, overthinking their behavior, trying to hold on to something that kept slipping away. And that's when it hits deeper. Because now it's not just about loss. It's about damage. They didn't just walk away from someone who loved them. They hurt someone who was trying to stay. And that thought is hard to sit with. So what do? At first, they try to push it away again. They distract themselves. They tell themselves it's in the past. They try to move forward. But this time, it doesn't work the same way. Because once awareness begins, you can't fully go back to ignorance. They've seen it now. And it keeps coming back in quiet moments, in late nights, in spaces where there's nothing else to focus on. And the more they sit with it, the clearer it becomes. You were real. Your effort was real. Your feelings were real. And they didn't handle it well. That's when the regret sharpens. Because now, they're not just thinking about you. They're thinking about what they lost with you. The consistency, the emotional safety, the way you showed up without games, the way you chose them. And here's where something important happens. Value becomes clear only when access is gone. And now, you're no longer accessible. And that creates something inside them, an urge not fully formed yet, but growing, the urge to reach out, the urge to reconnect, the urge to see if you're still there. But this urge doesn't come from clarity. It comes from feeling. And feeling is something they're still learning how to handle. So now they're caught in something internal. Part of them wants to reach out. Part of them holds back because reaching out means facing what they did. It means risking rejection. It means admitting they were wrong. And that's not easy for someone who avoids emotional discomfort. So they hesitate, they overthink, they go back and forth. But one thing becomes clear. You're no longer just someone they left. You're someone they can't stop thinking about. And that changes everything. Because what comes next is where the internal conflict peaks, where the urge to come back becomes stronger than the instinct to avoid. And when that happens, that's when they reach out. But the reason behind that reach is what determines everything. Because in the next part, we're going to break down something most people get wrong. Why they come back. What it really means when they say they miss you. And the dangerous mistake that can pull you right back into the same cycle. Because not every return is a real change. And knowing the difference is what protects you. Eventually, the silence becomes too loud. The thoughts don't stop. The memories don't fade. The feeling doesn't go away. And that internal conflict they've been sitting with starts to lean in one direction towards you. Not because everything is suddenly clear, not because they've fully figured themselves out, but because the absence has become heavier than the fear. And that's when it happens. They reach out. It might not be dramatic, no long message, no deep explanation. Sometimes it's just something simple. Hey, how have you been? I was thinking about you. And when you see that message, everything inside you reacts because this is the moment you once waited for. The moment you imagined, the moment you hoped would come, the moment where maybe everything finally makes sense. But here's where you have to slow down because their return doesn't always mean what you think it means. Missing you is not the same as understanding you. Wanting you back is not the same as being ready for you. And this is where most people get pulled back in because the emotions are still there. Not just for them, but for you. You remember how it felt. You remember the connection. You remember the version of them that made you believe in something real. And when they come back, that version feels close again. But you have to ask yourself something important. Are they coming back because they've changed or because they're feeling something they don't know how to handle? Because those are two very different things. When an avoidant reaches out, it's often driven by emotion, regret, loneliness, nostalgia, not necessarily growth. An emotion can be temporary. Growth is not. So what does this look like? They might say, I miss you. I made a mistake. I didn't realize what I had And part of you wants to believe it because it sounds like accountability. It sounds like awareness. It sounds like everything you wanted to hear. But words are not change. Change shows up in behavior, consistency, emotional availability, accountability over time, not just in a moment of feeling. And this is where the illusion begins, because when they come back, they often come back softer, more open, more emotional, more expressive. And it feels different. It feels like they finally get it. But what you're seeing is not necessarily transformation. It's emotional exposure. They're feeling something strongly. And for the first time, they're not running from it immediately. But that doesn't mean they've learned how to stay in it. And that distinction is where people get hurt again. Because if nothing inside them has truly changed, if they haven't done the internal work, if they still associate closeness with pressure, then eventually the same pattern returns. At first, everything feels good again. They're attentive, present, engaged, and you start to relax. You start to believe. Maybe this time is different, but then something familiar happens. Not immediately, not obviously, but gradually they begin to pull back again. Replies get slower, energy shifts, consistency fades, and suddenly you're back in the same emotional space, trying to understand, trying to hold on, trying not to lose them again. And this is the cycle, not because you did something wrong, but because nothing fundamentally changed. They came back with feelings, not with tools. And feelings alone are not enough to sustain a relationship, because love is not just about feeling something in the moment. It's about showing up consistently, even when it's uncomfortable. And that's the part avoidants struggle with the most. Not feeling love, but staying present in it. So now you're faced with a decision. Do you lean back into what feels familiar because it once felt good? Or do you step back and look at what's actually different? Not what they're saying, but what they're showing. Because this time, you have something you didn't have before. Awareness. You've seen the pattern. You've felt the impact. You've experienced what inconsistency does to you. And that awareness is your protection. You don't have to go through it again to understand it. And this is where your power begins. Not in whether they come back, but in how you respond when they do. Because their return is not the resolution, it's the test. And in the next part, we're going to talk about something even more important. What real change actually looks like, how to tell the difference between temporary emotion and genuine transformation, and the one decision that determines whether you repeat the cycle or finally break it. Because at the end of all this, it's not about whether they realize your worth. It's about whether you do, at some point. You stop asking what they feel. You stop trying to decode their behavior. You stop analyzing their words. And you start asking a different question. What has actually changed? Not what they're saying. Not what they're feeling in this moment. But what is different in a way that will last? Because this is where most people get pulled back in. They confuse emotion with transformation. But real change is not emotional. It's behavioral, it's consistent, it's visible over time. And that's what you have to look for, not intensity, not promises, not words that sound right. Patterns. Because patterns don't lie. If someone has truly changed, you don't have to question it. You don't have to analyze it. You don't have to convince yourself it's real. You feel it in the consistency. You feel it in the stability. You feel it in the absence of confusion. Because real love doesn't create anxiety. It doesn't make you overthink. It doesn't make you question your place. It feels clear. And this is where something shifts inside you, because now you're no longer looking at them the same way. You're not seeing them as the person you lost. You're seeing them as the person who couldn't meet you. And that changes everything, because when you see clearly, you stop idealizing. You stop focusing on their potential. You stop holding on to what it could have been, and you start accepting what it actually was. Inconsistent, unstable, emotionally incomplete. Not because they're a bad person, but because they weren't ready. And here's the truth that sets you free. Someone can care about you and still not be capable of loving you properly. And once you understand that, you stop trying to prove your worth to them. Because your worth was never the issue. Their capacity was. And this is where your power fully returns. Because now, you're not waiting for them to choose you. You're choosing yourself. You're choosing peace over confusion. You're choosing consistency over intensity. You're choosing stability over emotional highs and lows. And that choice is what changes your future. Because when you stop accepting less, you start attracting different. Not immediately, not magically, but intentionally. You begin to recognize the difference between someone who feels something and someone who can sustain something. And that difference is everything. Because you didn't just go through pain, you learned from it. You didn't just lose someone, you found clarity. Clarity about what you need, clarity about what you deserve, clarity about what you will no longer accept. And once you have that, you don't go back. Not because you can't, but because you won't. Even if they come back with words, even if they come back with emotion, even if they finally say everything you once wanted to hear, you see it differently now, because now you're not listening for how it sounds. You're watching for how it shows up. And if it's not consistent, if it's not stable, if it still feels uncertain, you walk away, not out of anger, not out of ego, but out of self-respect. And that's the moment everything changes, because now their realization no longer controls your direction. They may understand what they lost. They may regret what they did. They may even wish they handled things differently, but that realization belongs to them, not to you. Your story is about what you do next. And what you do next is choose better, not perfect, not flawless, but better, more aligned, more stable, more real. Because now you know love is not supposed to feel like confusion. It's not supposed to feel like uncertainty. It's not supposed to feel like something you have to chase. The right person won't make you question where you stand. They won't make you feel like loving them is a risk. They'll meet you fully. And if this resonated with you, it's because you've experienced something real, something that changed you, something that taught you more than you expected. And if you're at that point now, where you're starting to see things clearly, where you're starting to choose yourself, make sure you subscribe, because everything here is about helping you build something healthier, something stronger, something that doesn't break you, but actually supports you. And if this is something you've gone through, share your experience in the comments, not just for yourself, but for someone else who might be going through the same thing right now. Sometimes healing begins when you realize it. You were never the problem.